Mr. President,
The senator from Missouri.
asked to address the Senate as if we were still in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, needless to say, yesterday's announcement about our ongoing stature and status with Iran is, in my view, a dangerous step forward in advancing not only the illicit nuclear program that they've had up till now, but the clear nuclear weapons capability that they would have under this agreement. I think the agreement confirms that the president was too willing to get a deal with Iran at any price. The concessions made by the administration based on the starting point of these discussions, I believe to be stunning. All we have to do is go back maybe and just review a little bit of recent history to see that today Iran's advancement of instability, of terrorism, of violence in the world continues unabated and not hampered by the agreement that has just been announced. In the not too distant tomorrow, we'd see all of those things still continue unabated and unfortunately much better positioned and much better funded than they are right now. Supported by Iran, Assad in Syria has been massacring his own people, resulting in the deaths of at least 191,000 people in Syria. That's according to the UN, and that's according to the UN numbers a year ago. Assad, by the way, stepped forward immediately to praise this agreement. Supported by Iran, Shiite militias are continuing to support Assad and promote division and violence throughout the country of Iraq. Supported by Iran, Houthi rebels have seized key territory in Yemen and continue to work to destabilize that country. Supported by Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon wages terrorism and calls for the annihilation of Israel. Supported by Iran, Palestinian terrorist groups in Gaza continue to lob mortars and rockets into Israel. Last April, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Navy stopped a Marshall Islands flag ship as it tried to go into the Straits of Hormuz. And this is at a time when Iran is trying to get major countries in the world to negotiate with them. Iran continues to hold as hostages within any reasonable way of defining hostages and without any reasonable charge. 3 Americans, Pastor Saeed Abedimi, former U.S. Marine Amir Hamtaki, Washington Post journalist Jason Rezian. They also remain totally uncooperative in helping to locate the former FBI official Robert Levinson. And when the Secretary of State is asked about why these people weren't part of the negotiations, he says, well, this was a negotiation about nuclear weapons, but not about people unlawfully and wrongly detained. Well, it quickly became a negotiation about not just nuclear weapons, but all kinds of other weapons that we have prevented the Iranians from having access to in a worldwide marketplace. That quickly was added to the topic, but we couldn't get 3 Americans released and find out more about 1 American than we know now. The concessions laid out by yesterday's announcement were also, I thought, pretty stunning. On the idea of uranium enrichment, the Obama administration said a year and a half ago that Iran didn't have the right to enrich. In November of 2013, the Secretary of State told ABC News, quote, "We do not recognize the right to enrich. It's clear in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's very, very clear that there's no right to enrich," end quote. Under the agreement, Iran is allowed to continue to enrich. Inspections, the president said we would have to be able to verify Iran's compliance or Iran's cheating through anywhere at any time inspections. It's widely understood that any good deal must allow inspections, trust but verify. The president may say that's there, but it's clearly not there. In fact, last April, the president's deputy national security advisor proudly proclaimed that he said, under this deal, quote, we will have anywhere, anytime, 24/7 access to Iran's nuclear facilities. As it turns out, under this deal, inspectors will be forced to wait up to 24 days for access to suspicious sites once they ask for access to suspicious sites. That is a brand new definition of anywhere, anytime. Possibly you can have access in 24 days, and obviously lots of things can and would change in 24 days. Militarily, the president said we would disclose and define the possible military dimensions of the research and where Iran's illegal nuclear program had headed. The president said this information is critical to knowing what Iran's true breakout potential and their true intentions would be. Under this agreement, however, the option of examining the possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program is off the table. Sanctions. The administration said that removing all sanctions was a non-starter until Iran demonstrated that it's complying with the agreement. A little over a year ago, in March of 2014, Secretary Kerry said, Iran's not open for business until Iran is closed for nuclear bombs. However, we know now that Iran will, in fact, be open for business much sooner than that. This deal will not only allow them to be open for business, but they'll be rewarded with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of sanctions relief, return of assets that didn't have to be returned. And under this agreement, all sanctions, even those related to arms, missiles, and proliferation, will be removed. Not be suspended, these will be removed. And we have some of the most aggressive arms suppliers in the world in Iran now being given access to all kinds of arms that they couldn't get legally or easily up till now. All economic and banking sections, as well as those imposed on transport, on insurance, on petrochemical industries, and valuable materials, will be removed. Dismantling. The president said that Iran would have to dismantle its illegal nuclear program. In December of 2013, the chief negotiator, Wendy Sherman, told PBS that a final agreement should include, quote, a lot of dismantling of their infrastructure, end quote. Yet under this deal, we're seeing that Iran's program will, in fact, almost all be preserved, not dismantled. The length of the agreement, the P5+1 initially speculated and stipulated that Iran must accept restrictions on its nuclear program for 20 years plus another 25 years. And then later they said 20 years plus another 10 years. And finally, their last offer was just 20 years, which was in the end reduced to 10 years. And I think over the next 60 days, as people read the fine print of the agreement, they might find out that it's even less than 10 years. But they certainly know now that it's not 20 years plus 25 years, Mr. President. This is a bad deal for the United States and one that will embolden our enemies, jeopardize the security of our allies, further lead our friends to not believe they can trust us and our enemies not to be afraid of us. What worse place could we be in a dangerous world than that? The stated goal of the negotiations was to ensure Iran never develops the capability to produce a nuclear weapon, yet the president agreed to a deal that does just the opposite. By allowing Iran to become nuclear weapons capable and failing to provide for any time, anywhere inspections, this deal gives Iran a free pass to cheat at its military sites and no access to U.S. inspectors. Meanwhile, just last week, Iran continued the calls for the destruction of Israel. These are the people we just are allowing in the process of allowing to have access to more weapons and to become nuclear weapons capable. Just last week, Iran called, as it has for decades, for the destruction of Israel. and the death to America. In fact, as Iran's supreme leader stood by calling for the need to fight the U.S. even if there's an agreement. I don't know that we've ever entered into an agreement with another country before that while we're into the agreement, they say, and by the way, no matter what, whether there's an agreement or not, we want to continue to see the U.S. as an enemy that we need to fight. This deal undermines the security of our friends and allies. It legitimizes Iran's unapologetic sponsorship of terrorism throughout the Middle East. Interesting what could be included, by the way, Mr. President, what couldn't be included. Iran has repeatedly refused to abide by international agreements that require inspection of nuclear facilities, details of facility designs, acquisition and production of nuclear materials, and what makes us think that Iran is going to change that behavior now? The negotiations themselves should lead us to believe that the old Iran is still the new Iran. This is a bad deal. It's a deal that just hopes that in the next 8 or 10 years, the Iranian government totally changes, the Iranian attitude totally changes, our relationship with them totally changes, and just hopes that in the interim, between the time that we have that hope for change, the Iranians don't cheat. This is a hope, not a strategy, and it is a hope, not a strategy, that we let the world become much more destabilized on top of. After months of negotiations, Iran hasn't released a single American prisoner, or they haven't announced any intentions to do so. The Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, the Syrians, or at least the Syrians that still are controlled by Assad, may like this deal, but this is a bad deal for the United States of America. It's a bad deal for world stability. It is a bad deal for our friends. And frankly, I think that the law that the Congress passed that now gives the Congress of the United States 60 days to look at it will turn out to be 60 days that the president himself is about to find out what's in the deal that he and the administration signed. This is a serious matter for every member of the Senate. I was asked earlier today, are you going to lobby members of the Senate as to how they should vote on this agreement when it came up? I said, I'm going to do everything I can to talk about the real shortcomings of this agreement, the destabilizing of this agreement, but every member of the Senate is going to have to answer for this agreement and this vote for a long time. Members of the Senate on their own are going to have to decide what side of this to wind up on. And, Mr. President, I predict that a majority and maybe a substantial majority of the Senate will wind up understanding that this is a bad deal for America and a bad deal for the future of world security. I would yield the floor.